Welcome back. Before we get too far in this video, one thing that I've neglected to do is save the scene. So hopefully I haven't caused any problems by neglecting to tell you this. So make sure that you do save the scene, okay? And you can call it whatever. I usually call something like this game, just because, you know, it's just the main part of the game. And you can always change it after if you have to. So that should put into my assets folder here, my game. And if you want, you can make sure you call a scenes or create a scenes folder, okay, and drag your game into your scenes folder. There. And so now it's all nicely organized. So just make sure you do save. That's a common thing. And you would, unfortunately, if you didn't save it, you would lose your ball and paddle and all those things that you've sort of set up. You wouldn't lose your script, you wouldn't lose your sprites per se, but any of the settings in Unity would have been lost. Alright, so let's get into the meat of this lesson. So in order to get the ball to bounce, what we're going to do is actually create a material here. So sometimes you can bring in materials, but we're going to create our own here, something a little bit different. And so if you look on here, creating all these different things, what we can do is create a physics material. Now there's a physics 2D material. We're doing a 2D game. Might as well make that a 2D one. Okay. And what we're just going to do is get rid of any friction. Okay. And we're going to set the bounciness to 1. Now we can play around with that after if we need to. And we can give this a name. So let's just call this, call it bouncy. Okay. So that is something that we can add to our game after. Now it's sitting in my scenes because I had clicked on that. Let me just pull that out. So scenes. I think I can pull this. Just throw it in my assets folder. And so it's just sitting in the root of the assets. And we'll deal with that later. Now let's go back to our paddle and get some physics things on it. We've already got the paddle movement on there. Obviously we need a box collider. Okay, so physics 2D. Box collider, and if I zoom in on that, it should, if I turn off my renderer, you should see it pretty well there. Okay, and that should be good enough. Now you can see there's a spot for the material, so we simply add that there. So it's a bouncy, it will help push it. Now the next thing that we want to do is add a rigid body. So again, physics 2D, rigid body 2D. Okay, we can leave those as they are. We don't want to have any gravity. We don't want it falling down, but it is going to move. So set is kinematic on. And if you want, it's not a huge issue, I don't think. We're going to refreeze the rotation. And even we could freeze the position on the x-axis. And that's all we really need to do here. I would just double check that any of the changes that you've made haven't made any big issues, and they haven't. So we're okay there. Okay. Next thing is the ball, and we're going to follow a very similar situation here. Now it is a square, but to get it to bounce nice, we're going to use a circle collider. So I'm going to select the circle collider. We'll leave everything there. Now when we focus on our circle, our ball, you'll notice that it's just outside the corners there. Or right at the corners. I would just expand it a little bit, maybe to like 0.6 or something like that. Something maybe, yeah, 0.65, sure. And you can always change it up after. Same as before too, we need a rigid body, excuse me, rigid body 2D, and we'll leave everything the same, except we can freeze the rotation. Now this one we don't want to freeze the position either on the X or Y, because the ball will be moving in both those dimensions. One last thing we should do is add that physics material as well. So I'm going to grab that bouncy and put that on. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Now, for our game here, just zooming out, we obviously need some sort of boundary. Now the original Pong did not have visible walls, so we will keep that by just adding an empty and by putting in a box collider. Alright, so all I'm going to do is create a empty, okay, and we should probably reset that for the moment. Set. And so it's just in the center. And then what I'm going to do is physics 2D again, a box collider. Now it's not going to have anything that I can see, but I can change this up, and I'll just zoom in on that, and then just pull it. Okay, pull it to the end, and then pull it to the other end if I zoom out. And if it goes over a little bit, that's fine. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. And I'm going to change its transform position as well. So just click on that, and I'm just going to move it right, basically to the edge of the screen there. So I'm just going to zoom in. We don't have to, whoops, we don't have to get an exact one. Okay, now that's pretty close, okay? And again, if it required it, we could always change it up. So I'm going to call this game object, I guess top wall, makes sense. Okay, I'm going to duplicate that as well. Now I don't know too much if we need a bouncy on this. We'll see how the game plays without it. Okay, oops. So what I'm going to do is, again, Control D to duplicate that, and I'm just going to drag that down. Okay, oops, again, I didn't rename it accidentally. And I'm just going to bring it down, and I'm going to press F to focus in, and just drag it so that it's basically right at the edge of the window. And again, if we have to make some changes after, we can. So it'd probably be a good idea, change these names. So what did I call it before? Top wall and bottom wall. And we might as well put those into an empty just to keep it organized. So I'm going to create an empty, make sure, reset it. So these are going to be my walls. So to set this to wall here, once I get this going, I'll just change it up here. So those are my walls, and break that in. Now I am going to create one more wall, and I'm going to create a wall that will act as a sort of a temporary other player. Okay, and then that will let us test our physics and our bouncing and our player before we even worry about this other paddle. And that's always important when you're developing a game, is that, you know, sort of do small things and test and make sure it's working, and then sort of move on to the next part. The worst thing is, you know, create the whole thing, try to play it, and then you find out, oh, it's not working. Well, what's the problem, right? Where did we go wrong? So I'm going to Control D this one as well. Okay, so I got the top wall. This, like I said, is going to be temporary. So I'm going to rotate it around the Z-axis here, 90 degrees, so it's just vertical. I'm not going to worry that it's too big because, like I said, this is just temporary for play testing. I'm going to put them right there, right at the edge again. And maybe I'll even just call this temp player wall. Okay, so we'll leave this here. Okay, we basically set up the game, what we want to do, and I did that again. So temp play wall. There, hopefully that changed it. Good. And so we've got those there, and I'm just going to leave it here for now. Now what we want to do next is actually put some script on the ball to get it to move. Alright, so what we're going to do, like I said, is add the script here. So we're going to create a new script. So let's go into that. New C# script. Let's call this ball bounce. And open up in mono develop here. And so once it's open, we are going to change this to awake here. Okay, so it's a slightly different than start. Oops, of course my. Okay, I always have trouble with my keyboard. There we go. So it's going to be awake. We're going to create a couple before we do that, we're going to create a couple of variables. So I'm just going to bring that down. Now we'll get rid of this here. We don't need it. And so what we want to do is actually just, a couple of variables. So we're going to create a public float, which is going to be our ball velocity. Okay, so just like we did with our paddle. And I'm going to set with a number here. Again, we can change it up after, but I'm just going to set it to 1,000, and we'll see. Okay, if I come down, a couple other things, we want to set up the rigid body. So just like we did before in our last game, we're going to create a variable that will hold the rigid body. Okay, and I'm going to call it rigid body, if I can get my keyboard to work again, to D. Okay, and we don't have to do anything there. Now, when it's like that, it will, it means private if we don't state that it's public or private, it will default to being private. And that's okay here, because it's going to, on awake, it's going to automatically put that component in. We're going to do a Boolean, and so that's a true or false, as you know, and we're going to call isPlay, and that's just going to be if we're going to play or not play, or playing or not playing. And we're also going to create a random integer, and you'll see why in a moment. So we'll call this random int. So my keyboard comes back, and that will be a value that will allow us, to choose which way the ball is going to shoot. Okay, so what we're going to do here is in the awake, we are going to find that component, so attach it to our RB2D. Okay, so we're going to set that to the game object. So this is going to be on the ball dot get component. So that, make sure you don't do get components, that messes it up. So just one get component, and that component, of course, is our rigid body 2D. So you have to make sure you put the 2D in there. Okay, so now it's got that reference to the rigid body component, and we're also going to get it to create a random integer. Okay, and so we saw this before. Now it's a little bit different. We didn't, and Python we had to go random.randint. Okay, but you can see there's a lot more similarities than differences here. So we want random.range, and we're going to give a range of just 1 and 2. So it's either going to pick 1 or 2, and you can actually, we'll do 1 and 3. It means that it will pick between 1 and 2, really. Okay, so it gives us 2 values there. Now we're going to go into the update, and because we're going to be playing around with physics here, I'm going to change this into the fixed update. Okay, and then again, give us a little bit of space here as we work. Okay, and so what we're going to do is sort of 2 things. So we're actually going to check if input, and we're going to actually use the mouse here, get mouse button. Okay, so get mouse button, and the left mouse button is represented by 0. So if someone clicks the left mouse button, so that's true. Notice true in C# is lowercase, not uppercase. And so in Python we just typed and. Here we have to do 2 ampersands. And isPlay, oops, the space there, isPlay is equal to false. Okay, so basically we want to say that if the game is, so if we click the mouse button and the game is not playing originally, then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to separate the player from, the paddle from the ball. And we haven't made it a parent yet. We'll go back and do that. That's what that's going to do. It's going to separate its position from the parent. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second there. We're going to set isPlay to be true. So now the game is on. We are going to get the rigid body, so RB is kinematic. Just a second here. Is kinematic. We're going to set that to false. Okay. Okay, my keyboard is, oops, so I'm getting an error here because I need to have it as, okay, just a second. We need to make sure that this is 2D because I called it RB2D. Okay, dot is kinematic. That should fix itself up there in a second. RB2D is set to false. Okay, and the reason why we need to do that is something I'll explain in the next video, because I'm just looking, we're at almost 15 minutes here, so I will explain that in the next video. Alright, we'll see you then.